Hey, and good morning. Today we are talking about courage. I'm Angela Brown, and I'm here with the legendary, wise, and wonderful sage Omuugn. And today we are reading from the insights and wisdom of Omuugn. And today we're talking about courage. And this is page 163 to 166. And if you're following along, it's awesome because there's a bunch of stuff that sometimes we don't get to cover inside our conversations on Saturday. This would be there are poems in here that are easy to remember and they are aesthetically pleasing to the ear when you listen to them. And also, there are some insights and wisdom that many of us would call quotable quotes. And so, if you want to remember some little nuggets of gold wisdom, then I recommend that you pick up a copy if you haven't already. This is the Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn, Volume 1. It is part of a two-part volume pack, and it is something that we're working through every single Saturday with Omuugn himself. And today we're talking about courage. So please help me welcome Omuugn. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well, although it's 7 below 0 where I am,
Oh,
and I'm glad for a warm country fireplace and being able to work inside today.
that is too cold for my comfort. If I get that cold, I just get mean.
It's pretty cold.
Well, thank you for joining us on such an icy cold morning. I'm delighted to have you here.
Well, it's fun to be here. It's fun to talk about things that are fun to talk about.
Well, courage is I don't know that it's necessarily fun so much as it is one of those items that you have to stop and really give it some really deep insight and thought and focus on. Because oftentimes when we are called for courage, it usually is because there's a moment of fear or a moment of uncertainty or a moment of, I really am lost and I don't know what to do. And we sometimes have inclinations of what we might do. And so we have to rely on sometimes inner strength. So tell us a little bit in your own words what courage is, and then we'll dive deep into the nuances of it.
Well, usually we think of courage as being some heroic event that takes place on a battlefield or some physical challenge, but courage, excuse me, courage applies to many different facets of our life. And so that's what we'll be pursuing a little bit this morning. Uh, Courage equates with valor and determination and other good qualities. It doesn't just stand by itself, but it applies to things like there are people that have physical handicaps, and to approach life in a productive manner with a positive attitude and interfacing with people in a very constructive way is really a manifestation of courage. People that are confined to wheelchairs or have other physical handicaps, or if a person has a chronic illness, it, you can become discouraged with a chronic illness. And it's hard to really stay optimistic and cheerful and present yourself around other people like you would like to if you're not feeling well. Um, so we need to be aware of those kinds of things. Uh, Another factor is like the elderly. A lot of people, as they get older, they, I don't know how to say it comfortably, but they get crotchety. They get kind of self absorbed. Some of them, some people grace very or age very gracefully, and some age with a change of personality and other things that are they struggle with.
Can I
Um,
interrupt you for just a second on that? Because as a
yes,
house cleaner inside people's homes for 32 years, one of the things that I've noticed is that very thing where people are starting to age. And we've had some of our clients for 12, 15 years. And so we've watched them get older and we've watched them normally, and we knew them before when they were kind and compassionate and, you know, eager to live. And as they got older, they did get mean, if you will. But one of the things that I have discovered over the years is it's not that they wanted to get mean or that they just lost patience. But most of what we've noticed is that they're losing independence. And so in the face of lacking courage to ask for help, they're fighting and they're struggling with everything they have. Like, don't, leave me alone. I've got this. And they don't got this. And they do need help, but they don't want to ask for help. And they're ashamed and they're embarrassed to ask for help. And they don't want to admit that they're losing their independence and that they need help. And it could be something as easy as I can't reach anymore. What's up there? And for example, in the homes that we clean, there are shower heads on a hose and they're way up there. And in a perfect world, they reach up and they get it and they, shower themselves down. But once they've had shoulder replacements and things, their arms don't move like they used to. And so as house cleaners, we have to be really cognizant of the fact that yes, they're mean, but they're not mean. We knew them before they were mean. And so this is a lashing out saying, hey, I want my independence. But then we can kind of help them in a quiet sort of way where we've put, you might have seen those. They're like little bars, support bars that have little clips on the end and they suction onto the side of the showers. We've put those about halfway down the wall and we've stretched the shower head on a hose so that now it's kind of at arm level instead of way up there where it normally is, just to try to help them keep their independence a little bit longer. So I do agree with you that people have become crotchety and mean, but we've noticed that there's a very specific set of reasons why.
Well, and we also need to consider that there are a lot of other factors in getting old. For example, some people lose their balance more
Mm,
easily. Um, some people have a hard time stooping over to pick something up.
mhm,
People have a hard time even getting dressed.
mhm,
Um, it's easier to trip and fall when you're elderly. And so a lot of people are, I won't say afraid, but they don't want to start using a cane or something that they might associate with elderly people. And so it takes a lot of courage to address all of the possible situations, like the onset of dementia is really challenging for a lot of people. And it not only takes courage of the old person, but it takes courage of their support group and the people around them to, like you say, do it in such a way that you still support their individualness and their ability to take care of themselves every way that they can. But some people have a hard time remembering whether or not they've taken their medicine for the day, or
mhm.
just simple things like that.
We had a
So yeah,
situation we had a situation this last week where there was an elderly woman whose dog had peed on the floor, and she became completely helpless, like, "I can't bend over, I can't clean this up." And in order to help her maintain her independence longer, we were able to get her one of those little sweepers that has the spray on it, and there's like a bottle of Odoban odor remover. It's designed with enzymes to kill um, whatever the smell is that comes with dogs peeing on the floor. And so we were able to get her set up with one of these little spray machines where she could stand there and she didn't have to bend over, but she could use the little sweeper to wipe that up and then spray the stuff on the floor so that it would then remove the smell and sanitize the floor. And so without just her giving up, saying, "Oh, I just can't do this anymore," we were able to say, "Hey, look, check it out. Yes, you can. There's a new tool that will allow you to do it." And so having the courage to share information with somebody like that in a particular way that then allows them to have their independence a little bit longer, I also think is key, because it's really easy for somebody just to say, no, I give up. I just can't do it.
yeah, the day we live in is a wonderful day. There's so many new products and gadgets and things that are available. It really does, excuse me, it does help. There are other physical things like you can have a challenging relationship.
Mm,
Sometimes there are generation gaps, and we don't know how to bridge those sometimes, or sometimes we're actually afraid to interact with people in the way that we might offend them, or create a greater gap between the between the age groups. So we need to be brave and courageous in our relationships, where we're willing to sit down with people and communicate well, and maybe develop some of the other skills that we've talked about. Um, And there are people that have, for example, they're afraid of spiders or they're afraid of heights. There are a lot of things in the physical realm that we may not admit, but some people are afraid of snakes or barking dogs or whatever it might be. So the key here is to identify things in your physical world where you are kind of afraid. Sometimes we're afraid to see the things we're afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a tendency to push them to the back burner. And we go through life sometimes with, and there's a dividing line between, for example, a fear of heights and being sensible. You don't need to walk right up to the edge of a cliff or lean over a high balcony to prove that you're brave or
Mm-hmm.
that you're courageous. Common sense, which we've proven isn't very common, tells us to stay on the safe side. And if you're elderly, don't be afraid to use a cane. It's not a big deal. But using a cane is a lot easier than healing from a broken hip or
Mm-hmm.
some other thing. So common sense, which we have redefined as good sound judgment. You need to not be afraid to do those things if it's reasonable and sensible. Sometimes our fears are self-created, and if we just look at things differently, it's a way of pushing our courage to the forefront in a lot of different ways that are really, really helpful for a lot of people. And maybe we can avoid those people that get crotchety as they get old if they would look at life from a different perspective and realize that people are trying to help them and that they need to be courageous enough to change their attitude and to look at things differently. And, both parties need to be involved in it. So,
It's interesting because I think what you're talking about is not exclusive to old age. Asking for help is one of the hardest things that I personally have ever dealt with. And I'm not one to ask for help. I got this. You know what I mean? I'm fiercely independent and I'm really stubborn. And so if somebody tries to help me, I'm like, no, I got this. I'm going to do it my way. And I remember one time it was back in the late 1990s. I got married and I married an abusive alcoholic who was an amazing person. When he was sober, he was an amazing person and the love of my life. And when he was drunk, it was like Jekyll and Hyde, and it was a very dangerous situation. And I remember saying to myself, I deserve better than this. And I grew up in an environment that doesn't really support divorce. And I remember saying to myself, I'm not going to live like this. I can't live with Jekyll and Hyde. I can't live this way. My life is I'm young enough that I've got all this life ahead of me, and to be this afraid on a regular basis is not healthy. And so if it happens one more time, I'm going to leave. And I packed a gym bag and I put it inside my car. And I said to my husband, I have a gym bag inside my car with all my stuff in it. And I said, one more time of this abusive, mean behavior, and I'm out of here. I will not stay. And I made a commitment to myself. And it was one of the most courageous things that I ever had to do because I grew up not believing that you could walk away from a marriage. That was not in my chemical makeup. And I remember one night, my husband came home incredibly drunk and just violent as all could be. And I literally went out and I got in my car and I drove across the street. That's as far as I made it. I drove across the street to a gas station. And I sat there and I was like, I have nowhere to go. I have nowhere to go and I have no money. And so I don't know what to do. And I sat there saying, I thought through putting my stuff in the car, but I don't know what the next steps are. And as I sat there in the car, I said, who is the last person in the world that I could hang out with that my husband would come looking for me? And he had this aunt that he wasn't very fond of. And I said, I'll call her. So I called her. She lived in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I called her and I said, hi, I apologize. I'm calling you so late at night, but I need somewhere to go. And I'm leaving my marriage because of violence and abuse. And I need somewhere to stay for a minute while I pull my thoughts together. She said, "Don't drive, I'll come get you." And she drove down from Winston-Salem, which is about an hour and a half, and she picked me up with her husband, and her husband drove my car back. And I stayed with her for about 2 weeks until I kind of pulled my thoughts together and I was able to get an apartment and move out on my own and start my life all over again. And it was one of the most courageous things that I'd ever done because I didn't know her very well and I wasn't accustomed to asking for help. And I knew that in this one moment, in order for me to survive, I had to reach down inside myself and I had to do the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done, which is ask a she wasn't a perfect stranger, but almost a perfect stranger, ask someone else for help. I really need help in this situation and I don't know what to do. I've never been here before. And the next 2 years were probably the worst 2 years of my life. I went through a whole lot of PTSD because I had never grown up in an environment with violence and abuse. And so I didn't even know how to deal with that. And this is before I knew about therapy and I knew about counseling and all these different things that could then help me pick up the pieces of my life and help me move on. So when you say there are people that are as they're aging and they don't know how to ask for help, I think that actually goes through all different age demographics where at any level there can be somebody who needs help, but they don't know how to ask for help or they're not comfortable doing it or it's not part of who they are. And sometimes we just have to ask for help.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it does apply to everyone across the board. People want to feel independent. Uh, and as you get older, too, sometimes it's easier if two people lift something up rather than you're used for your whole life, you've been lifting everything by yourself. And then as you get maybe a little off balance or a little bit, you tend to get weaker as you get older, unless you're on a really good physical exercise program. You do need to start asking people to help and to do things that will preserve you don't want your back to go out or have some other problem. So we need to learn to ask for help. Yeah, there's a whole world of physical things that apply to courage. And it would be nice if that were the only thing, but there isn't. We live in a world today that's full of turmoil,
Mm.
and it takes moral courage. There's a thing called moral courage, and that's where you stand up for your beliefs and you approach the issues of the day. Justice versus injustice, and the moral integrity keeps society consistent. And it has to do with our core beliefs and our core values. There are a lot of people who will protest today about all kinds of things. Sometimes people protest and they don't even know what they're protesting for. They see a crowd in the street with a sign, and so they'll go out there and start yelling, and they don't even know what it's about. So it takes a lot of moral courage to stand up for your belief, especially when society turns the corner.
Mm.
For example, when I grew up, there were boys and girls, and life was really simple. And now today there are all kinds of pronouns that we have to consider, and people can choose between literally hundreds of different pronouns. And sometimes you're out of sync with society if you don't relate to people with those pronouns, which I have a very hard time of doing because to me there are boys and girls, and there are different ways that you can tell. Uh, our new justice on the Supreme Court doesn't know what a woman is, although she's a woman, and that's a scary place to be.
It's a scary place to be, but at the same time, when we look at an elder person who's had a shoulder replacement and they can't lift their arm to get the shower head on a hose, if we dig down and we say, hey, there's something we can do to make them more comfortable, I think that also transcends over into the group that you're talking about, where they're identifying as something other than a male or a female. When I look at people that are, and I actually have several friends that have either transgendered, they've what do you call it, transferred from one to the other, and I've got several friends that are in that category. And as they are looking at their lives, there's something unhappy enough about their lives that they're saying, I would be happier identifying as something different. And I don't look like that as something that they're forcing me to call them something different, as much as I see that they're really hurting, and how can I reach out and embrace them with unconditional love? Because however they identify doesn't affect me at all in any way. I still love them the same, whether they're a male or a female or a they or a them or however it is. I agree it's difficult sometimes to know what the pronouns are, but to look at them with unconditional love and say, this is one of God's children. And right now they're really hurting, and they're trying to identify as something that then makes them the best version of themselves, whatever that is. And I think sometimes that takes courage for them to say, hey, I was so unhappy being a woman that I decided to become a man, or that I truly am a man, or however they identify. And I know it can be really frustrating, but I think it also takes courage on both sides of that equation. It takes courage for them to say, this is how I identify. And it takes courage for somebody that doesn't understand it to say, I allow you to be who you are unconditionally. And I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to let God, make decisions and what have you. But I'm just going to accept you as you are and love you for the person that you are.
Well, I think that's a good point, and we should love everyone. Um, I think where the problem comes in is where if you allow them to be who they want to be, I have no trouble at all with that. But they demand that I change my core beliefs in their behalf. I have the right to have my own core beliefs and to see people the way I want to see them. I have the right to be who I want to be, and I have the right to control my own belief system and my own system of judgments. For example, there was one case where a pastry shop did not want to produce a wedding cake for homosexuals, and the homosexuals have a right to choose to be homosexuals. But if you force that right onto other people, you have to do what I want you to do, because regardless of what your belief system is. That's kind of crossing a line in my way of thinking. Everyone has the right to stand on their own moral principles. And I think that we should love everyone and treat everyone kindly and be respectful for the choices that people make. But that doesn't mean that we have to agree with them or facilitate that.
We've seen
If
a lot
it's
of that in our society, where there are restaurants and there are um, organizations and companies that have refused service to particular groups of people. And it becomes a debate whether that's right or wrong. And I know that there are people that have stood up and said, this is what I believe, and I'm gonna follow through on what I believe. And so I understand both sides of the concern, because, well, we live in a world of free agency, and everybody has their free agency, and everybody should respect the fact that, I have my free agency and other people have their free agency, and sometimes we're not going to agree. And so I think if you're willing to pleasantly disagree, but be respectful of each other, I think that you can find common ground.
oh, it's definitely a volatile issue. For example, in some universities, I've seen where if a professor doesn't address people with their chosen pronoun, they will literally lose their position at the university and they will be fired. And so I think society tends to maybe overextend in some areas where instead of recognizing everyone's right, for example, in America, we have a right of free speech.
Mhm.
And if I don't agree with something, I should be able to tell you that I don't agree with whatever is going on. And if I do, if I lose my job because I do that, I think we've overstepped our boundaries and we don't see things the way they were meant to be. Everyone has freedom and choice, and all of the people should be uh, sort of put on a level playing ground. You can't force people to do things against their will to support the rights of other people who demand that their rights be part of societal whatever it might be. So respecting everyone's free agency and letting them be who they want to be. See, everyone has their own belief system. Everyone does. And if you believe one way and I believe a different way, that doesn't necessarily mean that either one of us are right. It just means
Right.
that we have different belief systems, and we should respect each other because we have different belief systems.
Right.
And you
Well,
should not be able to force your belief system onto me, and I should not be able to force my belief system onto you. That's where the problems arise.
well, and I think coming back to courage, I think it takes courage to sit in any forum and to say, I respectfully disagree with you, and let's still be friends and let's agree to disagree. I know that in my business, for example, I've made an agreement with myself. I don't have to like my employees. There are people that work for my company that, I mean, they're okay. There's one I don't particularly care for, but that one employee is incredibly good at what they do. And although we may not see eye to eye, and although we may not be like the best of friends, we can respectfully disagree on most things. And we can respectfully work together and we can still create work together. And the work that we create together, in spite of the fact of our differences, is phenomenal. And so I applaud the fact that there are people in my world that don't see eye to eye with me. And here's the reason why: it enhances my world. It forces me to look at things from a different perspective. It forces me to question my own perspective because sometimes I'm like, I'm right, it's my way. And they're like, you're wrong. And here's why. And I'm like, thank you for having the courage to point that out to me because I'm surrounded by a whole bunch of people on my team that are, I'm going to call them yes men. And whatever I say, they're like, yes, Angela, and they go along with it. And there's one person that actually has the courage to stand out and go, nope, you're wrong. And here's why. You're right. You're absolutely right. Thank you for pointing that out. So I might not like it. And in fact, I don't like it at all. But I really appreciate the fact that there are people in my world that will show me a different perspective and give me then the room to kind of think it over. I'm guilty. I'm so guilty. Like in a meeting, they'll bring something up and I'm like, nope, we're not going to do that. And then 2 days later, I'm like, yep, we're going to do that. I thought it through and they were right. And this is a really good idea. Let's do it, you know? So,
Yeah, that brings up some interesting points that we may not have time to get into today. Sometimes there's courage, and sometimes there's lack of social skills.
mm,
There's a way to communicate if you don't agree with someone in a way that is non-offensive and is more productive. So
mhm,
sometimes if a show of courage isn't to just be brash and overboard, so to speak, we have to develop skills to interact with other people, and which takes us really to the next thing I would like to approach, and that is emotional courage.
mm,
Because sometimes, you're always going to have conflicts. You're going to have areas where you have to show empathy for people. You have areas where you react to things, and it's easy for our emotions to dictate what we do a lot of times because we feel strongly about things. But if you really have emotional courage, you're willing to listen to people. You're willing to show empathy and try to understand where they're coming from, some of the struggles that they're going through. We had one experience in our community. Maybe I've mentioned it before, but there was a young teenager who was working on a piece of farm equipment, and the farm equipment caught one of his arms and began to tear his arm off.
mhm.
And so he reached in with his other arm to save his arm, and he ended up losing both arms.
Oh,
And so, as a young teenager, he had to approach life now from a completely different perspective. No matter what I go through, a lot, no matter what, all of the time, I'm thinking about this person. Whenever I get discouraged about something, I think what courage he has demonstrated. He has put his life together so he's a productive person in our society. He has a job and he accomplishes things, and he doesn't ever talk about his disabilities. Uh, if I lost both of my arms, I would be emotionally drained. I mean, it
Mhm.
would be such a stark change in my reality. So, being able to handle your emotions under such a trying circumstance is really, really challenging. I have a couple of granddaughters who have muscular dystrophy and are confined to wheelchairs. And to approach life in a real positive way and to be cheerful when it would be so easy to not be cheerful, to have to go through painful treatments and doing things that are very uncomfortable, to handle that with poise and with a positive attitude. I admire those people so much. It's a courage that gets right into the basis of how our emotions operate. We need to be able to control our emotions instead of letting our emotions control us. And we need to do things that are in accordance with the universal laws and foundational principles that we talk about all of the time, and not be caught up in just how we feel about things. So learning to control our emotions and learning other characteristics like patience and tolerance, and learning the difference between reaction and proaction.
Mm.
Like when you had your experience where you left your marriage, if you actually told your husband that if this problem recurred that you were going to leave, at that point you should have actually made some preparations for that departure. If you're actually going to leave, then you don't want to be caught up in the emotion of the moment. You
Mm.
want to have thought through the process and say, well, if I do have to leave, this is what I'm going to do, and this is where I'm going to go, and this is the course that I'm going to follow. To the degree that we can plan ahead and make preparations, it sort of makes us emotionally prepared for that kind of a situation,
You know, it's
especially if,
interesting that you bring that up though, because I learned from that situation. When I was young, and I was very young at the time, I didn't have that skill set to be able to think far enough into the future of if this happens again, and it probably will based on history, here's what I will do next. But what's really interesting is in the other scenarios in my life as I aged forward and I was able to get some more common sense and I was able to learn from my previous situations. I have done that exact same thing, and I'm now remarried happily to the new love of my life, and he is the best decision that I've ever made as far as a relationship goes. But I went into that with both eyes wide open and with contingencies. So knowing now what I knew now, going into a new relationship, saying I don't ever want to find myself in a situation where I want out. And so I said to my husband, I do believe in till death do us part, but here's the caveat. If you find yourself ever in a situation where you're going to be happier somewhere else, please go. I don't want to hold you hostage here, and I don't want you to stay in a relationship you're not happy in. And I don't want to do that either. And so as long as we are both in this relationship because we want to be here and we both are willing to make it work, then I'm all for that. But the minute that you decide, hey, I'm not doing this anymore and I'm not part of this, just go quietly and peacefully away. No harm, no foul. Just go. And I won't hunt you down. I won't stalk you. I won't, be ugly with you. Just go. And so one of the things that I found in my marriage since then, and we're sneaking up on 22 years together. But one of the things I've discovered is every day I wake up, it's because I want to be in this marriage. I'm working every day to try to do a little something where I contributed to my marriage today. I want to make my marriage count today because I don't want today to be the day that my husband's like, you've done nothing to make me want to stay. I'm out of here. Right. So I've been fighting for it every single day, like, hey, this matters to me. And I think that takes courage too. But yeah, I did learn from that situation.
Well, as with everything, there are two sides to that coin also. There are many marriages that have rough times,
Mhm,
and there are times when people would like to walk away. And so you have to have the courage to stay and look for alternate solutions many times. If you're
mhm,
in an abusive situation where your physical well-being is in danger, then sure you should walk away. But if you're having a struggle with someone, you need to be able to sit down and say, listen, things are not going the way I would like them to go. Let's look at some ways that we could resolve this thing. And so you bring in communication skills and you begin to get on the same page with the way you see things and understand things. If someone is being abusive in some way, they need to really understand that and that you're not going to tolerate that.
mhm.
And so you need to try to solve situations. If you're in a situation where your partner will not communicate with you or be reasonable, or if they won't develop the interpersonal skills to operate within a marriage, then yeah, you might have to take a different route. But you should always pursue solving problems rather than just eliminating them.
Mhm.
If the problem is something really significant, like a marriage or a relationship with a child or a teenager, a lot of times we'd like to boot our teenagers out because they become so obnoxious.
Well,
Um,
thank you for not booting me out. I think I was one of those obnoxious teenagers.
well, people go through different stages and they have to mature and develop in a lot of different areas. And sometimes that development is not smooth and seamless. Sometimes people really struggle in realizing what their own belief system is and how to interact with other people and all kinds of things.
I
So,
wanna highlight that moment because when I was a teenager, I was irritable. And I was irritable because I don't know, I just had a hard time being a teenager. It was really tough for me. If I could go back and live my whole life over again, I'd just cut that window out and it wouldn't be included. But mom at the time was pregnant and hormonal, and she and I just clashed like oil and water. We did not get along. And I was trying to be respectful. I wasn't, yelling and saying mean things to her and whatever, but I would roll my eyes and whatever. And I did stupid stuff like that teenagers do that is really very demeaning. But I tried to just kind of avoid her, which was my way of coping, and she did one of the most courageous things that I've ever seen a human do. She came to visit me when I was 22 years old. And when she arrived, I got in the car and we drove to Virginia. And it was just a long, silent drive. And she's a very talkative person, and so am I. And we were just silent. And we stopped at a rest stop. And she said, "Where are we going?" And I said, "I'm getting off my turf and I'm getting off your turf. We're now in a strange place. We're strangers. What do you want?" And she said, "I want to start all over again." I was like, "What?" She said, "I love you and I want to start all over again. Is that possible?" And I was like, "I don't know." And she said, "Let's make some new ground rules." And I was like, What, why?" And she said, "Because I love you. I'm your mother." And I was like, "Okay, well, I need a mother." So that fits right into my plans. So we restructured our entire relationship. And we wipe the slate clean. All is forgiven in the past. Let's start completely over again. Here are the new ground rules. Here's what is required moving forward. And she told me all the things that I had done that hurt her feelings. And we listened. We were sitting there at a park bench at a rest stop. And we sat there until the sun went down and we restructured our entire relationship. And when we left, we went back to my house and we spent a few days and then she went home. I called her every week after that. And sometimes it was on Friday, sometimes it was on Monday, but for years it was on Friday, and we've now switched it to Monday, where we have a standing call every single week. And now, 33 years later, we have the opportunity, like we've become very, very close over the last 33 years. But we were able to completely restructure our relationship because she had the courage to call me on it and to say, "Hey, this, you're not acting like a grown up. Cut it out, start over again." Let's restructure our relationship and let's do this right. And I didn't know you could do that. I've never seen a relationship that was that far advanced that somebody said, you know what, I'm flipping the switch and we're starting all over again. And I'm so glad she had the courage to do that because it revolutionized my life. I have spent the last 33 years going through a variety of different business hiccups and relationship hiccups and personal hiccups and whatever with my mother right by my side. And I feel so grateful that she was willing to do that because that was probably one of the most uncomfortable things she's ever done.
Well, it brings up a point. The reason for these books that were written, uh, they approach all of the different traits and characteristics that make us who we are.
Hmm.
And we have a lot of traits that are in need of improvement, let's say. And there are a lot of things that we have strengths. So the point that you bring up is that on any trait, on any characteristic that we have, at any time, we can flip the switch. We can come to an awareness that this thing is not working in our life and we want to do something different. The way I'm living right now in this aspect is something that I really don't prefer. What would I prefer? And so you change your attitude, you change your direction, you change your energy, and you flip the switch. And at any time, we can become a new person. We can become a different person. We can apply the things that we've learned. And hopefully, we keep learning, which takes us to the next point that I would like to make, and that is intellectual courage. Because we interact all of the time with different ideas. Different people have different ideas, like your employee who would change the way you do things or the way you look at things or whatever. And there needs to be a really tactful way to do that to be optimized. But we need to be able to look at different ideas. When people try to communicate with us, we need to realize that some people, for example, are spiritual. We define them as spiritual because they have certain values. And there are some people who have different characteristics. Maybe they're brash, maybe like this employee who just speaks their mind without a lot of forethought. So we need to be willing to explore, to question, to challenge, uh, to look for wisdom. Excuse me, wisdom in places that we normally don't look for it. There's a lot of, for example, there's esoteric knowledge where from old manuscripts that have come down through the ages, there are sages who have lived in caves and meditated and done all kinds of things. And sometimes we're afraid to actually look at those ideas and say, that person was really strange. I don't want to consider the ideas because the person was strange. But information can come to us in a lot of different ways.
Hmm.
And it takes a real intellectual courage to embrace the pursuit of knowledge and to look in places where you normally wouldn't look, to question beliefs. For example, our culture today is moving in a direction that the country is not the same country that I experienced when I was a lad. We've gone into, for example, the immigration issues where we value people, we value families, we value people in other countries that don't have the same benefits that we have here. And we have a way, we actually have laws passed that allow people to come into our country and go through a process where they can become part of us if they want to be. And we have people at the same time violating those laws and just coming into our country, forcing themselves upon us, if you will. And how we handle those situations, we need to be able to do that intellectually on some level and make some wise decisions. We have the same thing with homelessness. Homelessness is a trend that is just growing in our country exponentially because of the finances. It's hard to get a mortgage in today's society with high interest rates. with working from home has changed the commercial real estate values. A lot of office buildings are sitting empty. In fact, this last week, I was reading where they removed children from a public school and designed a program where they could study from home. And they took these immigrants that were coming into the country and they housed them in the school because that was the only place in that town that would facilitate that. And so we have, on one hand, we have empty commercial buildings standing there that could house people and maybe resolve the situation, but they're putting them into schools and sending our children home to study. Sometimes I think we do things without really analyzing the situation. I know that a lot of people are homeless because of addictions that they might have, or family troubles, or all kinds of situations. Post-traumatic stress syndrome, as you mentioned. A lot of our veterans are on the streets. We need to be able to pursue the best way to do things. And every week now we're talking about AI, because AI is kind of redefining our lives. If we could input all of the different, the database for all of these problems, all of the situations, and let AI come up with some solutions, we could at least look at the solutions now as maybe a city council or a school board or whoever that might be, and say, these are the solutions that AI would propose for this problem. Are these good solutions? Are these things that we could incorporate into our community? It takes intellectual courage to question those things and to look at different ideas and to consider really how they fit into our value systems. And AI brings up a whole new array of intellectual courage because AI sort of has a mind of its own. And in some ways, because of the way it accesses the database, it can do it so much faster, so much easier. We might maybe tend to put more onto AI than we should. We should still be able to make our own decisions and to evaluate ideas. We have belief systems and ways of looking at things that to this point AI doesn't. They're looking at more of an objective thing rather than why something should happen and how will this impact other people. And we still need, I think, that human interaction. But AI is a tool that we should be using to solve a lot of these problems rather than just letting buildings sit empty and putting immigrants in schools and sending our children home. That doesn't
It
seem
is
like.
it is possible though that the buildings are owned by corporations and that the schools are owned by the government. And so our local government can make decisions based on property that it owns, but it maybe cannot make decisions based on property that someone else owns. And so maybe they were using the facilities and the resources that they had available to them rather than tapping into corporations that own large pockets of real estate saying, "Hey, can you help us out?" So there are probably some reasons why they did what they did. Maybe we just don't understand all those reasons. And I agree with you, there are other options available, but it would require everybody coming together saying, "Hey, collectively, how can we make this a better picture?" So, I mean, I agree with you, there are some issues, but I don't know that there's an easy answer.
Well, I think there is an easy answer, but it would take courage to look at it.
Mm,
As you say, for example, the function of government is not to put illegal immigrants into corporate offices.
mhm.
That's not a function of government. The function of government is to secure our border and allow people to come in a certain way,
Mm.
and not just to let illegal immigrants cross our borders and come into our country. Uh, for example, this MS-13 gang from South America. To be a member of that gang, you have to kill people. I mean, these are criminals, And we should not just open our borders and let them come into our country. We don't want them here. And there are people who are human traffickers and people who distribute drugs to our people. We don't want them here. We don't want those things in our society. So that's the function of government. And when government steps out of its bounds, that's where we have a lot of problems, where they force a school to do something because they have allowed immigrants to come into the country and there's nowhere for them to go.
Well, and I think there are two sides to that as well. You talk about human trafficking, but in a sense, there may be children that have been trafficked that if they can make it to America and they can make it to a safe place, maybe that's an opportunity for them to start over again, having lost everything that they feel, including their self worth. And so that might be an opportunity for them to start over. I know that some of the wars that are happening right now as we speak, there are a lot of immigrants that are making their way to America just as a safe haven. This is a place of refuge for them. And so I understand that that's their home and that their homeland and their family is at war right now. And so I understand we don't want the negative, the gangs and the the evil people to come in, but there are also some people that are just mere survival. Their only hope is if I can just make it to America, I can be saved. And one of the things that really, and we talk about courage, one of the things that has really come to my attention is that I was born and raised in America. I have always known a free country. I have always had the ability to be whatever I wanted to be, land of the free, land of the milk and honey. And I have never gone through any of the hardships that some of the immigrants are facing right now. And when you look at the nature and the cause and effect of the immigrant lifestyle, there are people that have given up everything. I mean, literally everything, money they didn't have, and they have separated from their wives and children just in order for their children to go to a free country. And they've been willing to sacrifice themselves in a not free country so that their children can have a better way of living. I mean, there are so many different elements to that that are just heartbreaking on every level that I don't know what the answer is, but you're right. It's really something to stop and consider because I'm just really grateful that I was raised in a free country and that I haven't had those hardships. But to look at some of that, like I said, it's just heartbreaking.
Oh, it is. But that's why, for example, we vet people. If a family is coming into our country and they're fleeing some kind of dictatorship or some extreme circumstance, we should vet them and see where they're coming from, why they're coming, and they should go through a process that protects them and allows them to better themselves while protecting
Mhm,
our own country.
mhm,
Just to let people come in, uh, there's something. See, we have the laws on the books right now on how to do all of those things, and our problem is that we're not doing that. I noticed this week Texas gave up on the federal government. They said, "You're not protecting our borders, and so we are going to protect our borders."
mhm,
That took a lot of courage for the governor of Texas to stand up for his belief and to activate the National Guard and say, "We're going to solve this problem because you won't solve it."
mhm,
And so, yeah, the courage can manifest on all different kinds of levels. School boards can be courageous in the policies and how they interact with teachers in this woke environment. How are we going to deal with our teachers? If a teacher has their own philosophy, their own belief system, their own core values, are we going to honor those or are we going to fire a teacher because they won't say there instead of
mhm,
you?
mhm,
So, yeah, we need to explore all of that. And moving out of, which is another form of courage, by the way, is to move out of our comfort zone. And our comfort zone, everyone has one. And we tend to live our life in our comfort zone. And when we start to push the boundaries in any direction, whether it's emotional or intellectual or physical or all of the things that we've talked about today, it takes courage and valor and determination to make those decisions. This is what I prefer, And so I'm going to pursue that. How many of us would like to learn how to play a musical instrument, or to speak a new language, or to do all kinds of skills and talents to express in different ways? How many people would like to be able to draw pictures and have some sort of an artistic element to their lives? It takes courage to learn new things and to extend our boundaries and to move out of our comfort zone. And so we need to be willing to do that. There are mentors in our communities, or now with the digital age, we can access mentors almost anywhere. People who are really successful doing certain things, and we can access them and access their knowledge. And a lot of people are willing to share, and they would like to help people. So there are a lot of ways in which we can manifest courage as a trait. We need to have the courage to look within ourselves and say, I need to be more aware of myself, what I really believe. I need to be aware of what I'm afraid of. I need to be aware of, am I afraid to speak in public? Am I afraid to interact with people? I'm sort of an introvert myself. And so I have to have the courage to introduce myself to new people and to say, hi, I'm so and so, and I don't know you, and I'd like to know who you are. Have you just moved into our community? And so as we stretch ourselves out courageously in all of the different areas, we can create a new life. We can flip the switches that we talked about and
Mhm.
just start living and doing the things that we prefer, instead of letting bad habits, bad traits, negative things uh, sort of self-propel themselves through our lives. We don't need to do that. We don't need to accept that. We can create a new beginning for ourselves, as you did with Mom. We can flip the switches and say, I'm going to start over now. If I
Mhm.
could live my life all over again,
Mhm.
knowing what I know now, I would do all of these things differently. So go through your life, do an examination, and say, well, I do know these things now, so I'm going to live my life differently. I'm going to interact with people differently. I'm going to be the kind of person that someone would want to be married to. And I'm going to interact with my husband with some information and questions so that I really know what he expects and what his core beliefs and values are. I want to be able to relate to those, which takes us to another thing of courage, which is to be authentic. Sometimes in our society today, we have a tendency to conform to society, conform to the changes that are taking place. And that's not really who we are, and those are not our values. So we need to live a life that is authentic to ourselves and our own belief system. And to be consistent all the way through to the end, to see our goals accomplished. And we've talked several times this year about the things that we've done this past year that we've been successful in. We've had the courage to take a project and follow it all the way through to completion. And that's just a really fun aspect of our life, maybe something that we've been putting off for forever. So there's just so many different ways in which courage can manifest. We want to stretch ourselves out of our comfort zones. We want to live in communities that are really well functioning communities. We want to support the people that we elect, and we expect the elected officials to support the platforms that they ran on and to be consistent. And it takes courage all the way up through society, from the individual to the government itself. And we need to demand that our government reflect our values, and yeah, to take a stand and to make our voices heard in a productive way. Maybe not screaming and yelling in the streets, but contacting our Congress people and saying, this is really how I feel about this situation. If you vote for this bill that's on the floor, I'm not going to vote for you because that conflicts with my moral values, or something like that. We need to do things that are effective, and it takes courage, determination, and many of these other traits that we've talked about.
Well, our time is up for today, and I really appreciate you delving into that because I feel like we covered a lot of ideas. And I think as we look at courage moving forward, we might look at it from a different perspective and certainly with more of an open mind. So I love the fact that we had this conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me. For those of you that are just joining us, this is from the Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn. This is volume 1 of volume 2. Both volumes are available now online. Get your copy and join us next week as we unpack more insights and wisdom of Omuugn with Omuugn himself. Thanks so much for joining me today, and we'll see you same time, same place next week.
It's been fun. Thank